Right, well, it's my great pleasure to welcome such a distinguished audience of the Saudi British Society. Those of you who are wondering, I'm not hovering somewhere above Baria, but they're using modern technology to at least be in Saudi Arabia in spirit. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the Ghazi al Gosaibi Memorial Lecture. We're also joined by Ghazi's wife Sigrid. It's a great pleasure to host her here, if not in person, at least virtually, and many people who knew Ghazi personally. It's a great pleasure to have to host you. It's a pity we're having to not do this together and in person. This is always a lovely occasion. We had a fabulous occasion last year at the Saudi Embassy when His Royal Highness Prince Khalid was the speaker and also the host, and we had a lovely evening. But we won't be able to commune and to enjoy the hospitality this year. But with the good news on a vaccine, at least 3 vaccines, or 4 if you count the Russian one, 4 vaccines, there is a good chance that we will have passed by this global crisis and be able to meet in person next year. But I'm extremely pleased to introduce someone I have known for many, many years, a great friend to Saudi Arabia, and a great friend to Ghazi al Gosaibi, who she has known personally for many, many years. And it's particularly appropriate to have Baria Alamuddin to deliver the Ghazi al Gosaibi Memorial Lecture this year. Baria is an award-winning international journalist and broadcaster. She was for many years the editor-at-large for the leading Arab newspaper Al Hayat, and is still a columnist for Arab News. She appears regularly on television to discuss Middle Eastern affairs, and she's a frequent speaker at international conferences. I'll just mute people who haven't muted themselves. Could I ask everyone to mute themselves as they come on? It's a great pleasure to have Baria deliver the Ghazi al Gosaibi Memorial Lecture for 2019. And without further ado, I will hand over to Baria, who, as I say, will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session on not just the life of Ghazi al Gosaibi and his attitude to reform, but the reform process in Saudi Arabia itself. I'm sure the lecture itself will open up many channels of discussion. So, Baria, over to you. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Sir William, a great friend indeed. And I must start by saying how jealous I am of those who are in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, joining us, enjoying the good weather, where we enjoy very rainy day, very cloudy and very cold day. But let's be optimistic and think of the vaccines, and that next year will be all together in person. Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my very dear friends. Indeed, many thanks to His Excellency Sir William Patey, President of the Saudi British Society, for inviting me to talk about an icon and a very dear friend, the late Dr. Ghazi al Gosaibi. God bless his soul. For me, Ghazi was a friend like no other, a minister, an intellectual, an ambassador, author, poet, a unique and a special human being. I've been asked to talk today about Ghazi the man, the reformer, and his ideals for women, which now we see being implemented in Saudi Arabia. Today, I will only modestly attempt to touch on these 3 aspects of his life, a life as rich and eventful as Ghazi's deserves an entire series of books, not a 20-minute talk. But let me start with Ghazi the man. I first met Ghazi in 1992 in Bahrain when he was serving as ambassador at the peak of his fame as a writer. This was just after the invasion of Kuwait, and in my journalistic capacity, I wanted to conduct an interview with him about the Gulf crisis and Saddam Hussein. Ghazi at the time was publishing a column, if you all remember, in Al Sharq Al Awsat newspaper entitled The Eye of the Storm, or Ain Al Asifa in Arabic. It was, I am reliably told, the best read column in the newspaper of all time. I certainly was waiting for it every single day. At his embassy office in Manama, as an aside and to break the ice, as I always do, I told him that the ladies of Bahrain were very unhappy with his choice of wife, thinking it should have been one of them, a Bahraini or a Saudi. They thought this German lady had bewitched him. Ghazi laughed and he said they were undoubtedly correct. 2 months later, Ghazi became ambassador to the court of St. James. On my first visit to his new London office, he asked me to meet his wife, Secret. He said she's new to the social ambassadorial life in London, and she's a bit shy. This association was the true beginning of our lifelong friendship. Secret from that day onward became my best friend, and I visit their Bahrain family home regularly. I am deeply fond and love their children, Yara, Sohail, Faris, Nijad, and their 11 grandchildren. In Ghazi's presence, you must all know there was never a dull moment. It just couldn't happen. He was dynamic, witty, well-read, informed. He was always curious, bold, precise. His generosity and empathy had no boundaries. He was fearlessly courageous. Let me share with you a few stories about Ghazi. One day I got a call from Jennifer or Mushira, I don't remember, asking me to come and visit him. My office at the time was 1 minute away from the embassy in number 27 Curzon Street. As always, Ghazi got straight to the point. I heard, I will omit the name, an Arab poet is about to lose his very modest house in London. We can't let this happen, Baria. I know he's your friend. Can you find out the details? My friend, the poet, never lost his house. I know of at least another one very famous Arab poet whose hospitalization and funeral were discreetly also paid by Ghazi. On another occasion, the call was about a journalist, a friend of mine who wrote for The Guardian. She used to write terrible things about Saudi Arabia. Ghazi asked me, Baria, do you think she would like to meet me and I would like to explain to her what we are all about? They indeed met quite a few times. However, even with Ghazi's impressive powers of persuasion, he was unable to change her mind. A year later, when she became very sick and being prescribed some medicines that the NHS could not pay, Ghazi paid for the cost and for her funeral as well. Ghazi was a man of very powerful opinions. He enjoyed talking to people who did not share his opinion, but did not often change his own mind. His friendship with Prince Charles is very well documented. However, when Prince Charles invited Ghazi to his 60th birthday, while omitting to invite Secret, Ghazi wrote an apology, regretting that not inviting his wife meant he would not be able to attend. The prince immediately wrote back with an apology. Prince Charles sent a deep, touching letter that I read part of in Chatham House to Secret after Ghazi passed away. In his letter, the prince remarked, "You have no idea how much I learned from him about the Islamic world, nor how deeply I valued his wisdom, advice, and experience. Seeing you both in London so often was a great joy in my life, And I do know how much Ghazi will be missed, particularly, I'm sure, by the custodian of the two holy mosques, to whom I have written in deepest sympathy. That was Prince Charles. Ghazi was a workaholic. He worked effectively in the office, but also read and signed papers after work at home and in the car, even while he was driving to the airport. Ghazi, as we know, was never impressed by titles or wealth. Due to his pragmatic and work-focused nature, he found the formalities of receiving and waving goodbye to visitors at airports a waste of time and avoided it except for only very special occasions. Embassy employees used to tell me how the embassy ran like a clockwork. Ghazi enriched the activity of the embassy immeasurably, and I'm sure you all remember that. Poetry reading, lectures, exhibitions, visits, exposing all aspects of the culture and social dimensions of Saudi life. We learned so much about Saudi Arabia thanks to Ghazi hyperactive advocacy. His attitude towards leadership is encapsulated in one of his well-known quotes. Authority without firmness leads to a dangerous complacency, but firmness without mercy leads to an even more dangerous tyranny. Ghazi enjoyed the simple things in life. I remember his last trip to Paris with Secret, where he was invited to read poetry at UNESCO, and I joined the family then. He deeply appreciated the beauty of Paris, a good meal, laughing and engaging in really interesting conversations. He had the wonderful ability to laugh at himself. On one occasion, he commented, "I can personally testify to poetry's calming effects, since during my poetry reading sessions, I always find some members of the audience snoring to meter." Ghazi said of his wife, Sigrid, "I was lucky in marriage. If I'm successful in some aspects of my life, it's because my wife was a true and real partner. She stood by me silently and with love and devotion, without which I could not have dedicated the time I did to my work." Ghazi frequently asked Secret's opinion in matters of state and governance. Whether he followed this opinion or not was another matter, of course. When they got married, Ghazi never asked his Christian wife to convert to Islam. Although he was a true believer, a real Muslim, Secret told me, ultimately we both believed in the same things. Ghazi with his children was both lenient and strict, but always loving. Seeing his beautiful daughter, Yara, the apple of his eye, growing up, tested the limits of both his progressive instinct and his traditional upbringing. He had difficulties at times concealing the two aspects of that. Ghazi's reputation and position in history is rooted in his role as one of Saudi Arabia's foremost technocrats throughout a lifetime of service, playing a major role in establishing the modern Saudi state. When it comes to his insights and views on reform, Ghazi was decades ahead of his time. He was the mastermind and founder of Saudi Basic Industries Corporation, SABIC, as a catalyst of industrialization in the kingdom. Already in the 1970s, he was a lonely voice calling for greater reliance in solar power. During his 1970s ministerial roles, Ghazi was famous for distinctly being tough, having a tough stand against corruption. He commented in Arabic, إذا ضاع الوطن هل ينفع المال? In English, if the nation is lost, how will wealth help us? Although as industry minister, he controlled by far one of the largest budgets, he never faced accusations of wastage mismanagement, or corruption, he was described as the scourge of international companies for his zero-tolerance approach to improper payments and attempts to overcharge for contracts. On one occasion, an aide brought to his attention an attempt by a South Korean company to win a tender through a large bribe. Ghazi arranged for the company to be caught red-handed, passing over the bribe. Company representatives were then deported and blacklisted. The official who reported the bribe was awarded the full value of this bribe for his honesty. I find this fascinating. On another occasion, he rejected all tendered bids for the construction of a number of power stations, which he said were hugely inflated. Ghazi personally traveled to a number of Far East states and returned with bids priced at less than half the original round of tenders. He publicly always clashed with certain notorious business figures believed to have made a fortune through corrupt arms deals and improperly exploiting their connections. He also famously, as we all know, a famous incident, departed from his job as health minister in 1984 over a poem entitled A Pen Bought and Sold, published on the front page of the Saudi newspaper Al Jazeera, petitioning the King Fahd, on the issue of corruption and government inefficiencies. Nevertheless, all during that period, he remained very close to King Fahd and continued to enjoy his majlis, having lunches and dinners with him. The fact that he was awarded the glittering prize of ambassadorship to neighboring Bahrain, a country that he loved and considered his own, immediately after this incident, is a testimony that he remained in the royal court's good graces. According to Ghazi, telling of this 1984 event, this is a quarrel between a father and a son, not a sacking. This is how we looked upon his relationship with King Fahd. His time as ambassador to Great Britain also ended abruptly, if you remember, in 2002, around a controversy over a pro-Palestinian poem, leading to an outcry in the British Parliament. Claims that Ghazi had extremist sympathies were, of course, ridiculous, given that he was one of the most outspoken Saudi voices against extremism before and after 9/11. He remorselessly attacked Islamist militants in his books of nonfiction, in novels, in poetry, in every speech he gave. Of course, on the other hand, militant Islamists hated his progressive reforming views. Osama bin Laden, in a taped message in 2006, called him a liberal fifth columnist. It's impossible that Ghazi deliberately engineered. It is not impossible, actually, that Ghazi deliberately engineered his abrupt departure from London. He was getting quite tired. Also, given that he had already been asked by Crown Prince Abdullah to return to Saudi Arabia due to King Fahd deteriorating health. When he returned to Saudi Arabia, I remember there was talk with him and King Abdullah asking him to be the Minister of Information. And Ghazi said, how can I be Minister of Information while all my books are not allowed to even be read in Saudi Arabia or to be sold in Saudi Arabia? I'm very happy to tell you that my last visit to Saudi Arabia, in Al Jazeera library, bookshop, all Ghazi's books were there. This is unbelievably amazing. I took tens of pictures of the books there. So he remorselessly, it's not possible, it's not impossible that Ghazi deliberately engineered his abrupt departure from London, given that he had already been asked by Crown Prince Abdullah to return to Saudi Arabia due to the King Fahd's deteriorating health. As Labour Minister from 2004, He spearheaded the national strategy of Saudization and pressured private sector firms to employ a greater proportion of Saudi nationals. In his efforts to encourage Saudis to be more open-minded about jobs they would accept, that they should accept, Ghazi spent 3 hours serving hamburgers at a fast food restaurant in Jeddah. I'm also asked to talk about the issue of women in Saudi Arabia, a subject that's very, very close to my heart. I have some wonderful friends in Saudi Arabia that I simply adore. On the issue of women, Ghazi's public views were in stark contrast to the increasingly conservative turn of the kingdom from the 1970s into the 1980s. He strongly argued that women were the intellectual equals of men and had the same right to the full set of professional and social opportunities. Ghazi warned against those who preferred, to quote him, to deprive women of any knowledge or intellectual life, who seek to stifle all the potential capacity and talent Allah endowed women with. Only now is Saudi Arabia beginning to catch up with the views of one of its greatest minds on the rightful place of women. Ghazi worked hard in support of women throughout his entire career, believing that there is nothing women cannot do. As a Minister of Labor, he energetically supported laws to facilitate access of women to the workplace. He helped pave the way for women to serve as shura councillors in the Chamber of Commerce, entering widening segments of the workplace and constituting the majority of graduates. Today, 57% of graduates in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are women, as well as abolishing, He also worked very hard on abolishing the guardianship laws. He was also an early advocate of women drivers. But when you asked Ghazi about the subject, he thought this was a minor matter inflated by the international press. Yet he worked very hard for it to happen. Ghazi notably wrote the foreword to the controversial 2005 novel Banat al-Riyadh, The Girls of Riyadh, by Raja Sani, about the challenges encountered by girls growing up in the kingdom. As a novelist himself, Ghazi's support was motivated by both the desire to support a female writer and to widen the scope of debate about the lives of Saudi women. After Ghazi returned from his treatment for terminal cancer, I arrived to Bahrain one day ahead of the family. Ghazi had lost a lot of weight, which made him look younger. I did not see any signs of sickness, which filled me with hope and bitterness that the doctors may be misdiagnosed. Yet, in a further terrible blow, just a few days after they arrived, Secret's beloved mother suddenly passed away. Secret asked me to be with Ghazi. I really wanted to go to Germany. I loved Secret's mother so much, but she forced me to stay. During that week, Ghazi talked about the things we had always talked about: politics, friends, the state of the world. He never mentioned his illness. He was so serene, incredibly so serene then. However, he also expressed profound disappointment at reforms not progressing as rapidly as he desired in Saudi Arabia. He was furthermore saddened and angered by the aggressive wave of Islamic militancy engulfing the region. He regarded Iran leaders as cowards, but believed that they should not be trusted and worried about their designs for the region. With Secret's permission, I later on published segments of our final conversation, as Ghazi died 10 days later. During this memorable discussion, going back to the woman, Ghazi asked me about women leaders that I interviewed, like Indira Gandhi, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and Benazir Bhutto, people he had known and met. He respected and admired strong women leaders like Margaret Thatcher, with whom he enjoyed a good working relationship. Ghazi was the accompanying minister during Indira Gandhi's first visit to Riyadh, and I was the last journalist to interview her before she died. We both admired her simplicity, yet grandness. Ghazi also praised her dignity and composure, not begging for aid or trade, concessions like many other politicians. He was really mystified that while everybody comes to ask for some form, this woman with a very poor country did not even mention it at all. He also admired Claire Short for her courage in resigning from Tony Blair's government over the invasion of Iraq. It's no small part due to Ghazi's inspiration that I'm currently writing a book about Saudi women. In the thousands of interviews I've conducted, I've discovered that the golden key to getting women to open up to me and to respect me was to mention that I know Ghazi. They are mostly indifferent when I mention other world leaders. This was done by mature, respectable women who became giddy with excitement when I referred to Ghazi al Gosaibi. I know that Ghazi today will be looking down on us and feeling justifiably very proud of how rapidly Saudi society is beginning to move in order to catch up with his thinking on these profound issues. Today, the heavens opened for Saudi women, and Ghazi was the constant champion of all those brave women who demanded their full freedoms and rights. He had deep love for his homeland. Nobody would be prouder than Ghazi to see it flourish. And few played such a profound role as Ghazi did in laying the groundwork for his nation's success. There isn't a day, my friends, that I don't miss Ghazi. I don't miss his advice and counsel. I know that there are many people who are like me at the same time thinking, what does Ghazi say? What does Ghazi think? May God bless his soul in heaven. Thank you.
Baria, thank you very much for a very moving and personal tribute to a man that many of us grew to admire over many, many years. I'm going to ask anyone who wants to ask a question to somehow indicate it. They can put a thumbs up in their on the reactions if they want to ask a question. I know that there are ambassadors, former British ambassadors on this call who have had many years of interaction with Ghazi al Gosaibi in one capacity or another. Certainly when I was Andrew Green's deputy in Riyadh in the 90s, Ghazi was a very prominent interlocutor for us and over many, many difficult issues. And I'd happily invite any of them, if they want to share any of their reflections on Ghazi al Gosaibi, which they could share with with this group. And if any of you have any questions you want to put to Baria or anything you'd like to recall about Ghazi, please let me know. Andrew, I dropped you in it there really, but I know how we had to deal very closely with Ghazi. So I'd like you to also reflect on Ghazi, the man, the ambassador, or the politician.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent talk, if I may say so. It captured so much of Ghazi, who's a huge and complicated and, as you said, almost hyper-intelligent person. So first of all, warm greetings to Sigrid, who I think is on this call. Having said that, I remember one story about Ghazi, which may or may not be known. Towards the end of his time in London, he really thought it was time for him to retire. He thought he'd done his career, and he went back and he went to see Prince Abdullah, And he said to the prince words to the effect, well, you know, I'm 65 now, perhaps it's time to retire. And the prince just looked at him. He said, how old are you? He said, 65. The prince said, I'm 70. End of story. That was the end of the discussion, I think. He, as you well know, went on and did some remarkable work as a minister in Riyadh. One question, if I may. I don't know whether social media had come into effect in Saudi Arabia or elsewhere when he was still a working man. But do you know whether he did get involved in social media and whether how he regarded it?
I can tell you that it was just starting, and I remember talking to Ghazi about emails and computers and messaging, and he hated anything to do with technology, and he hated to have this phone next to him, but it wasn't that much, but still, I think he caught just the very end of it, but also then he read all the newspapers, all the comments about him, and he regularly answered everything. I remember when he had this huge quarrel with the militant religious people in Saudi. It took a lot of his time to make sure that he answered every point and everything. It was unbelievable how he found the time to do all that. And that's why I mentioned, because I know more than one time some papers that were actually, I remember one paper was signed when he was in the car behind his brother's coffin. His brother Nabil had died here in London suddenly, and they were taking the body to Saudi Arabia, and he still had papers and he still was signing. Because later on I asked him and I said, like, how did you find that? He said, I actually signed it on my way to the airport. He had such discipline when it came to his work that I actually have not seen. And I'm happy to say that his book Hayat fil Idara, which is a life in management or in working with the government, is now being taught at the universities in Saudi Arabia. It has become regular in the curriculum there, which I'm sure it would please him immensely.
Andrew, if ever was a man who would get into trouble on social media had it been around in his time, I imagine Ghazi would be right up there in the top 5.
You guessed what I was thinking, William.
So he was lucky he had retired before it had hit us.
He would have gone for it. You're quite right.
I'm going to turn to Sherrod Cooper-Coles now, who's got a memory to share with us.
Well, Baria, Elf Mabruk, that brought tears to my eyes. You spoke from the heart.
Thank you, Sherrod. Thank you.
A giant among men, someone with an enormous brain, a big heart, and a great liberal sensibility, a beacon of civilization. I knew him in his last few years. I read his book, Yes, Saudi Minister, when I first arrived in Riyadh, as my guide to a bureaucracy which had much in common, as he knew, with other bureaucracies around the world. And I saw for myself his relationship with the Prince of Wales, where he gave as good as he got from the Prince of Wales and didn't stand for any sort of self-pity from the Prince of Wales, which he was occasionally prone to. And there was a very amusing incident when, as Minister of Labour, Ghazi took the Prince of Wales, with me in attendance, to visit a vocational training centre. And the Prince of Wales put on a mask or goggles or something and started rather sort of haphazardly trying to hammer some nails into a piece of wood. And as quick as a flash, Ghazi turned around and said, "Ah, Sherrod, the Prince of Nails, I see it." Just this sort of instant wit. Thank you so much. In dark days, amid the encircling gloom of what is happening to so many of our beloved countries, to have you speak like that about the liberal values which we all should hold dear is just wonderful. Elf Mabruk and Shukran.
Thank you, Sharaf. Thank you. And thank
You're
you, Lord
welcome.
Green, also. Thank you.
Anyone else either want to share reminiscences about Ghazi or ask questions, or Caroline?
Baria, can you, as far as I remember, Ghazi was very instrumental in helping sort out that awful problem of the Shias who left Saudi Arabia, and he helped bring back those who wished to come back in the 1990s. Can you comment on that at all, please?
I can comment around it. I can tell you that when Ghazi was here, we often spoke about people who were in opposition here, Shias and otherwise. And Ghazi believed firmly in talking to them and conversing with them and in listening to their point of view and convincing them. And I know, not from Ghazi, but from people who were very close to the late King Abdullah. Ghazi had a great relationship with two kings, really, three, Fahd, Abdullah, and the late also King Khalid. He had very close relationship, particularly also with King Khalid, I believe, who gave him his first ministerial job. And they listened to him. So I remember somebody who was very close to Ghazi and King Abdullah telling me, if we want to convince the king of something, and this guy was in a very, very high position, we would often go to Ghazi and tell him to tell King Abdullah. And he can do it. And I know that a lot of work had been done in the Shia areas, because I again went to the Shia areas. I went to Al-Ihsa and to Qatif and talked to many women there who told me about the reforms that they had felt during the days of King Abdullah and further. And I know that the children, for example, Princess Adila went there herself, and they had programs, etc. So definitely, I don't know, for me, I think Ghazi was instrumental not only when he was in Saudi, in the ministries he administered and he was responsible for, but almost in everything. There are numerous write-ups about people who attended the ministerial meetings, saying that if two ministers clashed or if there is a problem, everybody will go to Ghazi to make sure that the meeting ended up well and everybody was okay with everybody. He had this wit about him that we all spoke about, that also made his very forceful views be accepted in a very nice way. I think that helped him a lot.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm scanning here as I go around. If anybody puts their hand up or on the chat room or anything.
I'll say something.
Yeah, who's that?
Alan.
Alan. How, Alan? Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
Well, we got a triumvirate of former ambassadors to Saudi Arabia here.
Again. Well, I was fascinated and indeed also considerably moved by your words about Ghazi, a heroic figure. And I have the privilege of working closely with him at one or two points just prior to his appointment in London, when he was ambassador in Bahrain, and then subsequently in London, where we joined forces in one or two campaigns, if you like, in which he took a lead to keep the Saudi image in an honest frame, particularly in relation to the then Labour government. And I have his a very interesting and close friendship that he forged with Lord Levy in mind here. But also at the time of the Gulf War, when he was involved in that column you mentioned, Baria, that he got into hot water. He had this gift for getting into hot water, never being boiled in it. And indeed, not only that, but finding himself then thereafter probably promoted to something even more illustrious by the government, by the leadership, and by the king indeed. This was a considerable gift. It showed what courage he had in what he said, but the agility with which he would deploy his thinking. There was one moment, I think, in the Bahrain stage during the Gulf War, when he got into some degree of hot water. And you may remember this more clearly than I, because it had to do with journalism. And he made certain allegations about al-fitna, a conspiracy. And this aroused some controversy at home, whether it questioned his loyalty, indeed, at some point, with all the effort that was going into the war. And he was actually arguing, I think, about quite how straightforward the whole approach was in his own country. Well, people took note of that. The message came home, I'm quite sure. And what happened, some of us said, well, I'm afraid that's probably the cooked goose for Ghazi. Not a bit of it, he was promoted to London. And goodness, we did all benefit from that presence in the diplomatic circle here, particularly in the Arab circle. I had one particular spell working with him vis-a-vis, indeed, the Panorama program, who not for the first time chose to produce a somewhat sensational piece. I think Andrew Green will remember it had to do with the time of the nurses, if I remember, which I think was in your spell. And we joined forces, and I went to see Duke Hussey on behalf of Ghazi. At the time, Duke Hussey was head of the BBC. And we presented between us a clearer picture, I think, of what was happening on both sides. And Duke Hussey then said, you know, how he admired the contribution and was so aware of the contribution that Ghazi was making, and did actually drop a little aside, saying, well, as usual, Panorama is out of control. And I have to tell you that, coming straight from the top of the BBC. Well, some of us might say that that hasn't changed a great deal. Interesting though the program invariably is. So he was always prepared to go and tackle controversy in a very straightforward and candid way, with an agility, and it always served him and his country well that he did so. And simply, I'd just like to follow it by saying also, I think he is in the forefront of Arab novelists.
Definitely, most definitely.
He ranks with the very best of the Egyptian and Algerian novelists that I have known of.
And Lebanese.
And Lebanese too. And he's not often sufficient tribute paid to him for his contribution in the literary field in terms of fiction.
Yes, Sir Alan, I must say thank you. The last time I saw you was on doing Radio 4. We were talking also about Saudi Arabia, and we met in the studio there. Ghazi had a very interesting relationship with the media. He liked the media, respected the media, used the media in a very intelligent way, but hated to record interviews. He wanted things to be live. He just didn't trust them when it came to recording. He wasn't happy when they took bits and pieces from here, which normally, changed the whole sense of an interview. He didn't always find it easy to deal with journalists in this country. And if I may say so, I'm British Lebanese, and I've been living here in this country for 40 years. But I find it very strange when many people write about the Middle East, so-called experts who have never been to the Middle East, who have just formed ideas from here or there and stereotype people. This is something we should all work upon, because I think there is a bit between us as Arabs and British. I think we have a history of friendship that the media need to know more about. They just take one or two cases and stereotype. Like I fell a victim to that, actually, indeed, the first time I went to Saudi Arabia, not having read a lot about Saudi women in the Arab press. And this is one of the reasons that made me start my research about Saudi women, is that little was known. All the books were about the princess who ran away and the others who sleep all day, this image of Saudi women. Well, guess what? You go to Saudi Arabia and find that the Saudi women are responsible for the development, they don't talk. This is the problem. Happily now they talk, they are in the forefront, they understand what it means to explain themselves and to say who they are. But we here, I think, especially people like us who have been to Saudi Arabia and are friends of the kingdom, should speak more and should meet more in radio studios and television studios.
Good. Well, I think we've got time for one more question or comment. If I'm scanning the horizon here, if there is one. If not, I'll just recall that my personal dealings with Ghazi were.
William Najah has a question.
Najah has a question. Where okay, she's down the. You're way down the bottom left hand of my screen, Najah. Okay, on you go. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Do I need to do it? Najah, I'll.
Okay, just thank you so much for the lecture. My memories of Ghazi al Gosaibi was his effort and push to help women to get jobs. I remember in 2011, and I was a journalist in Saudi Arabia, a law allowing only Saudi women to work in beauty shops. And this has eventually challenged the segregation law in Saudi Arabia, because it was the first time allowing women to work in shops and beauty. I would like to know a little bit about Ghazi al Gosaibi as a Minister of Labor, and how much he was passionate about helping women to get equal opportunities in the workplace.
I can share with you that the last time I saw Ghazi as a minister was at the Ministry of Labor, but unfortunately soon after then he was sick. But when I was there, Ghazi was in a very bad mood. He was having problems with all these businessmen because of the permits and because not allowing, he wanted more Saudis to work and indeed more women. I remember him telling me that they should, why is it that men are selling women's clothes? Why is it that women should be able to do that for themselves? Ghazi really believed in the role of women, and if you see how, for example, Ghazi, I know, treated his wife or daughter, you would see that, and his sisters, and he valued women. And I remember him once telling me when that, in Arabic we have this, that wara kul azim imra'a, behind every successful man is a woman. He says, what are you talking about? They're in front of us and we are hurriedly running, trying to catch up with them. This is the wrong image. So, I do believe what he believes, by the way, so I agree with him. But to be honest with you, Najah, there is nothing that Ghazi could do to further the participation of women in the workplace, because he knew what it meant to the economy. He knew what it meant to their standing in the society. He knew you could not develop a country without the development of women's work and education and position. And even when he started at working at the university, he always wanted to push women. Anytime, if a man came and a woman came to ask for the same thing, he would always help the woman more. In the Ministry of Health, indeed, he always helped women to get the same salaries, the same, job satisfaction, everything. I don't remember a time where Ghazi did not stand for women in every ministry he had worked, indeed at the embassy here as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Baria. Sigrid, you're still on the line. I want to thank Baria. And I'm going to address this to you, Sigrid, because clearly you'll have heard the amount of love and affection and admiration, and not just from Baria, but from all the British diplomats who worked with him. And I add my name to that. When I was head of Middle East Department in London, Ghazi was the ambassador. And if you ever wanted anything done in the Middle East or amongst the Arab ambassadors, it was Ghazi you went to. He was undoubtedly a giant amongst the ambassadors. He was clearly a leader. He was admired by us all, and those of us who got to know him more became loved by many of us. And I think Baria has clearly done justice to a man. I think Ghazi would be looking at what's going on in Saudi Arabia and saying to himself, this is the culmination of my life's work. There's more to do. There's more reform to come. But this is what I've argued for all my life. This is what I've worked for all my life. And I think I hope through this lecture, Baria's lecture, to your children and to Ghazi's grandchildren, you and Ghazi's grandchildren, this has helped to convey some of the warmth and admiration and love that people felt for him and feel for him. And so please accept our deepest affection and our warmest regards. And I'm very grateful for Baria for giving us such a beautiful eulogy and a beautiful memory of such a great man. But Sigrid, I don't know if you want to say a few words to the group. I know I've put you on the spot there, but
thank you very much, William, for your very kind words, and all the other ambassadors as well. And I'm sorry to miss you all this year, and I hope we'll be able to meet again next year. And thank you, Baria, for this very moving lecture. And thank you, William, for organizing it. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you, Sigrid. Baria, a great thanks to you for giving us such a warm tribute to a man who we memorialize every year with a lecture. It's fitting that this year we should talk about the man himself and not the subjects around which he devoted a lot of his life. Your Royal Highness, I hope in 20 years' time we'll be able to admire you with the same warmth and affection. You're doing a great job already, but you know what shoes you've got to fill in terms of one of Saudi's greatest ambassadors to Saudi Arabia. But we wish you well in your job going forward. And I just want to say to all the members of the society, please, you will have noticed now that we're up and running with lots of young Saudi trustees, with a new website, with a new updated Twitter account. We really need you to spread the word a bit, get it out to those of you who you know have a deep interest in UK-Saudi cultural relations, to get them to get on the website, join the society, and keep so we can go from strength to strength. But I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope next year will be a very different year, where we'll be able to meet in person. And to do the things the society does very well, is promote personal contact and networking, and so we can all enjoy and share our love of Saudi Arabia with all its idiosyncrasies and all its faults. Those of us who spent many years there still love it, despite its faults, indeed in some cases because of them. So I thank you all for attending. I thank Baria for coming. We thank Sigrid for gracing us for their presence. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.